we go. So you all getting that notification? All right, good. Super duper. So this is the first of a series of presentations that's going to go through next Sunday. I'm going to send you a list of all of those presentations. So you know who's speaking on what topic on what day. Most of them, I think with the exception of two, will be at this time. And the others will be at 2 o'clock my time, which is 5, from 5 to 7. All of them will be recorded, and all of them, with a little help from my friends, will be available for listening and watching on a YouTube account, a channel, I think it's called, which will be called the University of the Kingdom. Nothing. That's an expression that I found in a tablet of Abdu'l-Baha many years ago, and I thought it was perfectly apt for what we're doing, because we're doing really quite high-level courses on topics related to the faith. And by the way, if any of you are having difficulty seeing the other classes that we're showing, I can, before we end, I will give you the link for our landing page. The landing page reproduces the flyers that we have either emailed or mailed out to people. And there's a flyer for each program. And we haven't put out all the publicity for all of the programs in one batch. And it's a good thing, because we've had a lot of changes. There have been people who have had to reschedule. There have been people who have had to cancel. And so there have even been a number of changes that happened this weekend. So my job is to keep you informed about what's actually going to happen, not what we said was going to happen previously. Right. So the landing page will be an accurate source of information. As I said, I'll give you that link before we end. Now, the way we want to do this is to give the presenter approximately an hour, more or less, to actually talk about a particular topic. During that hour, if you have questions, probably the best way for us to do it would be for you to write them down so that we can treat them at the end. So the second hour is really yours. It's entirely yours. You can bring up any topic, you can make any comment, but I think it's better if we wait until the presentation is over for two reasons at least. One of the reasons is because we have lots of interruptions. For some of us, it's difficult to keep on track. It's hard to decide, like really have a sense of where the thing is going because of the interruptions. Another important aspect of it is that it doesn't give you the opportunity to discover that the question that you asked or wanted to ask 10 minutes into the presentation was answered 20 minutes into the presentation. Okay, so you didn't really need, all you need to do was wait a little while and you'd have your question answered. And of course, I'm reminded of the many accounts of Abdu'l-Baha, of pilgrims who went to Haifa to see Abdu'l-Baha. And they had a whole slew of questions to ask him. And then they'd go into his presence and they couldn't remember any of the questions because his presence was so powerful. But he answered every single one of their questions without being asked. Well, that's not going to happen because I'm not Abdu'l-Baha. But maybe in the course of my presentation today and future presenters, maybe we will answer many of the questions that you have. So let me begin by saying that I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk about a particular topic from what might be an unfamiliar way of looking at that topic. For those of you who are at all acquainted with Marion Lippett, with Diane Iverson, with Doug McAdam, with Michael Kafis, and with the many, many other people who have engaged in studying the worlds of God as it was formulated into a book, a compilation really of kind of workbook. And that was published in the 1960s and 70s and even into the 80s. And there are many, many copies of that all over the world. So for those of you who have that particular orientation, you will have a way of approaching the topic according to that matrix, that pattern, that model. And what I'm going to talk about is a little bit different, but it's approaching the same model. First of all, Marion was very aware that the most clear explanations for Baha'i cosmology or Baha'i ontology, I'll define those terms, were the writings and the speeches, the talks of Abdu'l-Baha. This is what she was relying on. That's what everybody of her generation did in America. We relied on Abdu'l-Baha because there was a lot of material that was available in English with the content of his tablets and talks. There were 3 volumes of the tablets of Abdu'l-Baha in print from the very beginning of the 20th century. There was Promulgation of Universal Peace, which first came into publication in the 20s. There was Paris Talks. There was Abdu'l-Baha in London. We had a lot of material in English, easy to understand, and readily available. And we bought copies and we read them from beginning to end in many cases, and sometimes over and over again. My wonderful friend from Maine, Wayne Hoover, every single one of his Baha'i books was annotated heavily. He personally wrote in the margins where you could find this idea, where you could find that person, because he was doing the correlation of the texts he could read. So that was the principal access that she had. And then, of course, she found passages in the writings of Baha'u'llah, translated by Shoghi Effendi, that were corroborating, or at least seemed to be corroborating, the ideas that were presented by Abdu'l-Baha. A lot has changed over the years. One of the things that has changed is that the Guardian's letters, both to individual believers and to Baha'i institutions, have been published. Thousands and thousands and thousands of letters have been published. And why is that important? The reason why it's important is because the Guardian interpreted for us. And the Guardian had access not only to every talk and every tablet of Abdu'l-Baha, but also every tablet of Baha'u'llah and of the Bab. So he had the access to all of the sources, and he was, of course, absolutely fluent in English, in French, in Arabic, and in Persian. Now, fluency, my friends, I am a native speaker and writer and reader in English, but I do not think that my fluency of English is close to Shoghi Effendi's. Shoghi Effendi had a miraculous understanding of the English language. And this is what anybody who knows Persian or Arabic and also knows English will tell you. When you compare his translations to what the original is, it's absolutely extraordinary because of his mind. He understood at a level that most of us only achieve when we follow him. When we follow him, then we can get it, right? His writings are they're intelligible. I'm not saying that you can't read Shoghi Effendi and understand, not at all. It's the fact is that often you read Shoghi Effendi talking about Baha'i ideas and you understand them for the first time. Because when you were reading Abdu'l-Baha, you sort of understood. It was somebody else's translation of what he said in Persian or Arabic. It wasn't the original. And the original wouldn't have done you any good anyway, because you don't read in that language. And even, by the way, native speakers, native readers of Persian and Arabic, very few of them have the capacity to read Baha'u'llah with confidence, because Baha'u'llah is writing in 19th century Arabic, and he's writing very often using philosophical and theological terminology that is very unfamiliar to the average reader. You have to do a lot of that sort of reading to know what he's saying. But here again, Shoghi Effendi understood it all. And praise be to God, he translated so much. So much. It's really extraordinary when you think about it. The last important book of Baha'u'llah, the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, which is like a summary of all of his teachings. It's like a collection, a compilation of the greatest hits. Okay. And then the Kitab-i-Yagan, which the Guardian said, this is the most important theological work of Baha'u'llah. He uses doctrinal, but it means the same thing. This is the book that is going to tell you what it means to see things as a Baha'i. And then, of course, he translated many other texts as well, including many passages from the Kitab-i-Aqdas. So why all this talk about the Guardian? Well, because I'm going to start with the Guardian. I'm not going to start with Baha'u'llah. I'm not going to start with Abdu'l-Baha. And the reason why is because the Guardian made very clear statements in English about the nature of reality. And when you know what the Guardian said about it, you can go back and find Abdu'l-Baha saying the same thing, Baha'u'llah saying the same thing. And then you have the complete picture. Unfortunately, when we try to do it the other way around, when we try to say, well, what does Baha'u'llah teach on a subject? We get so mired down in our inadequate understanding of what he means in Arabic or Persian that we can end up in all kinds of different tangents and not understand what he's saying. I need to take a 1 second break because I have my 3-year-old who is showing me her artwork. That's her artwork. And here is the 3-year-old. This is Ava. And her mommy is from Madagascar. All right, baby. I love it. I love it, baby. Yes, I'll keep it for you. Okay, I'll see you later. So let me say a couple of words before I delve into the Guardian's statements on the subject of what is reality. By the way, this is what the Worlds of God presentation is all going to be about. What can we learn about what is real and how can we differentiate that reality from our vain imaginings and idle fancies? That's what Baha'u'llah calls them. Marvelous, marvelous term. So there is a fair amount of confusion amongst Baha'is that does not have a particular point of origin. So to explain that, you could say, well, you know, if we're confused about things today, it may be because there's no living guardian. We can't go to that living guardian and say, well, guardian, what does this mean? Or what is the Baha'i teaching on this subject? And how can we be sure that this is the right interpretation? We don't have a living guardian. So we can look at that and say, well, that might be the cause for the fact that we have so many nutty ideas. Okay. But no, that's not the case. That's not the case. Well, how do I know that? Because go back to the 1930s and pilgrims, we have this recorded conversation of the Guardian with some American pilgrims, where the American pilgrims were telling him what Americans believed. And the Guardian was shocked. He was really shocked. It was clear from the conversation. And soon after, about a year or two later, he wrote the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. And the purpose of the Dispensation of Baha'u'llah was to clarify Baha'i doctrine on a number of very important matters. And so this confusion, this sort of falling in love with idle fancies and vain imaginings is not peculiar to our time. This was happening back in the 1930s. It was happening a lot before that. There's a tablet that Baha'u'llah wrote to two of the major teachers of the faith. One whose name was Shamirzadeh, the other whose name was Burujirdi. They were both of them eminent teachers of the faith, very knowledgeable in Islamic tradition, philosophy, and theology and law. And so they had a major difference of opinion about his station. So they went to him. And this is so this sort of thing has been going on for a long time, is the Baha'is read the writings and they come up with their own understanding. And then they want to go off and tell everybody, well, this is the way to understand it. That's not going to go away, my friends. We're human beings, but we have to become critical thinkers and understand that thanks to Baha'u'llah, thanks to God, we have a covenant. And the covenant clearly tells us who is the tiebreaker, who's going to settle the issue. Okay? And during Baha'u'llah's lifetime, it was Baha'u'llah. And then he appointed Abdu'l-Baha to be that function, to serve that function. And then that function went to the guardian. And we don't need, even though we would all love to have another guardian, we really don't need another guardian because we have so much evidence from what the guardian wrote, what the master wrote, and what Baha'u'llah wrote. We can figure this out for ourselves. And maybe this is part of the wisdom, I say, only part of the wisdom of us not having a living guardianship. Maybe it's time for us to grow up. Maybe it's time for humanity to actually enter the cycle of fulfillment, the cycle of maturity, which means that we have to take responsibility for our own thoughts, our own beliefs and not rely on somebody else. Well, so-and-so said it, so it must be true. No. Since when, I think there's a lot of wisdom also that the faiths spread to America very early, and that the guardian and especially the master believed that this was a very important thing for humanity, that it should have come to America, and that Americans were going to come to understand this faith and then spread it to the world. And why do I say that? Because we are a very critically minded people. We see it usually in a negative veil. We tend to think that we are so critical that it's nothing but negativity, and that we eliminate so many good things because of our insistence that things make sense to us. But it's a great strength as well. It's a huge strength. And it's a strength that the world needs so much, because the world is so confused by superstition and idolatry and all kinds of theisms where they create false gods to worship. This has been going on for thousands of years. It's got to come to an end. And Baha'u'llah says it has. This ends now. It ends with this cycle, with this dispensation. So now I get to the guardian. So I'm going to start out with a statement that he made in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. He says, "To whoever may read these pages, a word of warning seems, however, advisable before I proceed further with the development of my argument. Let no one meditating in the light of the aforequoted passages on the nature of the revelation of Baha'u'llah mistake its character or misconstrue the intent of its author. The divinity attributed to so great a being and the complete incarnation of the names and attributes of God in so exalted a person should under no circumstances be misconceived or misinterpreted. The human temple that has been made the vehicle of so overpowering a revelation must, if we be faithful to the tenets of our faith, ever remain entirely distinguished from that innermost spirit of spirits, the eternal essence of essences, that invisible yet rational God, who, however much we extol the divinity of his manifestations on earth, can in no wise incarnate his infinite, his unknowable, his incorruptible, and all-embracing reality in the concrete and limited frame of a mortal being. Indeed, the God who could so incarnate his own reality would, in the light of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, cease immediately to be God. So crude and fantastic a theory, a divine incarnation, is as removed from and incompatible with the essentials of Baha'i belief as are the no less inadmissible pantheistic and anthropomorphic conceptions of God, both of which the utterances of Baha'u'llah emphatically repudiate and the fallacy of which they expose." Now, the Guardian said it all in that one paragraph. When you study that one paragraph, you will find that the ideas that are true in religion, in every religion, are clearly delineated from the ideas that are not true. Because here you have incarnation. All those religions that teach that the manifestation of God or the guru or the priest or any human appearance of God is an incarnation of the deity is simply wrong. It's a misunderstanding of reality. he emphatically makes that statement. He makes just as emphatically the statement that the reality of the worlds is not pantheism. Pantheism is the great leveler of doctrines. It is adopted by so many people now, because if you can say everything is God and everything shows us God, and I can, it's equality, friends. We love equality. Let's all be equal. Let's all be the same. Let's not have any ranks anymore. Let's not have anybody lording it over anybody else. Okay. But that love of freedom and that love of the individual having a great number of options stops at a certain point, because it doesn't make us God. Now, you can find particular verses of Baha'u'llah which you can interpret in a pantheistic manner. You can. And people have been doing that for 100 years. But they're wrong, because the Guardian said that it's not. He says it is inadmissible, right? He says that the utterances of Baha'u'llah emphatically repudiate this idea. There's no going back once you find out what the Guardian said what he said. There's only going forward, and that is to recognize that you have to go now and read Baha'u'llah with his understanding, because that is the true understanding. So anthropomorphic is simply the belief that has been so popular among human beings that we can describe God, that God is like us, that God must have all of our attributes. And so if we're feeling lazy or immoral or unethical or anything else that is not acceptable according to the teachings of the manifestations, we could say, well, God is like that too. God likes to take a break from time to time. God doesn't want to be held accountable for what he does. Exactly. What we do is we turn him into a human being. He becomes anthropomorphic. He has human attributes. This is, again, completely repudiated by Baha'u'llah. And when he points out some similarity between God and the human being, he's talking about it in the context of guiding us, not about telling us who God is. This is very important stuff for us to understand, because then when we go back to read Baha'u'llah, then we see it in a new light. Let me read another one. This is a long one, and it's talking about Christianity, but it's directly related to the Baha'i Faith as well. A parallel might also be drawn between these confused and confusing systems of thought that are the direct outcome of the helplessness and confusion afflicting the Christian faith and the great variety of popular cults, of fashionable and evasive philosophies which flourished in the opening centuries of the Christian era, and which attempted to absorb and pervert the state religion of that Roman people. Sound familiar? The pagan worshippers who constituted at that time the bulk of the population of the Western Roman Empire found themselves surrounded and in certain instances menaced by the prevailing sect of the Neoplatonists, by the followers of nature religions, by Gnostic philosophers, by Philonism, Mithraism, the adherents of the Alexandrian cult, and a multitude of kindred sects and beliefs. In much the same way as the defenders of the Christian faith, the preponderating religion of the Western world, are realizing in the first century of the Baha'i era how their influence is being undermined by a flood of conflicting beliefs, practices, and tendencies, which their own bankruptcy helped to create. It was, however, this same Christian religion which has now fallen into such a state of impotence that eventually proved itself capable of sweeping away the institutions of paganism and of swamping and suppressing the cults that had flourished in that age. So he's making this contrast between the original power of Christianity and the current powerlessness of Christianity. And what is the cause? Because the purity of the Christian teachings are what were powerful. Those original teachings, not all the stuff that got added on by people believing, oh, well, this sounds like a good idea. Let's add this on too. So, and that's not my interpretation. This is what he says right afterwards. He says, the indwelling Spirit of God, which in the apostolic age of the church animated its members, the pristine purity of its teachings, the primitive brilliancy of its light, will, no doubt, be reborn and revived as the inevitable consequence of this redefinition of its fundamental verities and the clarification of its original purpose. And what is he talking about there? He's talking about the Baha'i Faith. The Baha'i Faith is doing just that. It is going back to the fundamentals, to the pure original principles. And the Guardian goes into much detail on this subject in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah. 1 minute break. Yes, baby.
Can I some
You have to go play with your sister, okay?
I don't want.
Yeah. No, we're gonna have to wait a little while. You go play with yours. All right? I'll be right back. So someday, I think it would be beneficial, and I have several days set aside for further investigation into the worlds of God in the coming month, in the month of August. And I'll certainly be happy to invite you all to participate in that one as well. We can go more into what the Guardian wrote in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah and in other of his institutional letters that it will explain the clear understanding of reality that is set forth not only in the Baha'i writings, but in the original writings and scriptures that we have for other faiths. So now we're going to get right into it. One of the principles that is affirmed, Baha'is are very familiar with this principle. The principle that the intermediary between God and the manifestation has many names, has had many appearances, but is the same reality. But we formulate it, each one of us, in our own way. Here's what the Guardian says. This is one of my favorite passages from the Guardian because of its beauty and its clarity. It was in such dramatic circumstances, recalling the experience of Moses when face to face with the burning bush in the wilderness of Sinai, the successive visions of Zoroaster, the opening of the heavens and the descent of the dove upon Jesus in the Jordan, the cry of Gabriel heard by Muhammad in the cave of Hira, and the dream of the Bab in which the blood of the Imam Hussein touched and sanctified his lips, that Baha'u'llah, he around whom the point of the bayan hath revolved, and the vehicle of the greatest revelation of the world has ever seen, received the first intimation of his sublime mission, and that a ministry which, alike in its duration and fecundity, is unsurpassed in the religious history of mankind, was inaugurated. It was on that occasion that the most great spirit, as designated by Baha'u'llah himself, revealed itself to him in the form of a maiden and bade him lift up his voice between earth and heaven. That same spirit, which in the Zoroastrian, the Mosaic, the Christian, and Mohammedan dispensations had been respectively symbolized by the sacred fire, the burning bush, the dove, and the angel Gabriel. This is from a letter dated the 26th of June, 1946, published in Messages to America. It was written to us. And look at that crystal clarity. All the nutty ideas that we might come up with, that somehow Baha'u'llah is the intermediary between God and the manifestations. And, so there's different kinds of, there's the manifestation. He's somehow different from all the other manifestations, which, by the way, is a no starter. That's a non-starter with teaching anybody the faith. If you're going to teach them, my manifestation is bigger than your manifestation. Here, the Guardian is telling us in crystal clear English, they're getting the inspiration the same way. It's coming through the same process, and it's got different names. Okay. So I'm going to give you a snapshot, an image to have in your mind, because you can see this image on your wall, maybe on your ring, maybe on your necklace. It's the Baha'i ringstone symbol is what we usually call it, right? We'll come back to this later on a number of times. But the amazing thing is that our understanding of the nature of reality is something that we can put on our finger. It's that simple. In a very profound way, we're teaching people about the structure of reality, the reality of the world, by simply wearing jewelry. Isn't that amazing? By showing photographs of the Shrine of the Bab, because they're seeing the image, and the image is going to make an impact. And eventually that mind, that soul is going to ask, what does that mean? And that's where they come to understand the Baha'i perspective on reality. So here I'm going to start with more letters from the Guardian and on his behalf. Baha'u'llah is not the intermediary between other manifestations and God. Each has his own relation to the primal source. But in the sense that Baha'u'llah is the greatest manifestation to yet appear, the one who consummates the revelation of Moses. He was the one Moses conversed with in the burning bush. In other words, Baha'u'llah identifies the glory of the Godhead on that occasion with himself. No distinction can be made amongst the prophets in the sense that they all proceed from one source and are of one essence, but their stations and functions in this world are different. By the way, anybody who wants to reread these quotes, just let me know. I'm going to give you my email. When I get an email saying you want it, I will send you the paper. Abdu'l-Baha says that the major difference between the Gnostics and the religionists is that the Gnostics maintain the existence of only two worlds, the world of God and the world of the creature. The prophets, however, maintain the existence of three worlds, the world of God, the world of the will or the word, and the world of created things. The prophets therefore maintain that a knowledge of God, meaning a direct knowledge of God, is impossible. As Abdu'l-Baha says, man can never know God or even imagine him. If he does, that object is not God, but an imaginary idol. That's the first one I cited about there, Baha'u'llah is not an intermediary, was written on the 19th of October, 1947. This one was written on the 29th of November, 1929. The dates are not important. I'm just citing them because so you understand that it was over a number of years that the Guardian was sending these responses to perplexed Baha'is, clarifying what the Baha'i doctrines were. So another one here. There is only one way to God, and that is through the realization of his manifestation or prophet in that age. Christ called the world of the prophets the Word, in the sense that the Word became flesh, while Abdu'l-Baha calls it the will. Anyhow, it is only through these that we can know God. These manifest the divine attributes, and therefore, by knowing them, we can know God. The mystic path that the traveler should follow is therefore to the prophet. By coming in contact with him, will he obtain peace. That was on the 29th of November, 1929. Another one, the same date. If these are the only means through which man can obtain his highest goal, namely the knowledge of God, could we believe that God has ceased to send them? Talking about the manifestations. As Baha'u'llah says, would it not be a blasphemy to say that God's bounty existed in the past and that ever since the time of Christ, it stopped? And for all eternity? No, God has always sent and will ever send these prophets who would represent God on this earth, and by reflecting the divine attributes, give us knowledge of him. Now, this is related to that symbol that I mentioned. The inscription upon the Baha'i ringstone is the symbol of the greatest name, Baha, who is the manifestation of the essence of God. It is also symbolic of the three planes, representing the world of God, the world of revelation, and the world of creation. This was written on the 28th of February, 1938. So that is my purpose in citing these quotations from The Guardian, is so that it will be clear that he endorsed a specific way of understanding reality. It's unique. It's unique. It clashes with the theological views of many people of religion. There are many, so you don't even have to go beyond Christianity and Islam to see that there are many Muslims, including very eminent leaders of thought, eminent writers, who have understood reality differently. There are many who are among those called Sufis in Islam, who adopted a doctrine that God is in all things, that God is all things, a pantheistic or panentheistic view of God. And there are some who have suggested that Baha'u'llah went through a Sufi phase where he was espousing this point of view. I point you to Epistle to the Son of the Wolf. Well, first of all, the Guardian clearly denies that that's the case, because he's made it so clear that Baha'i doctrine is Baha'i doctrine. It's not a sort of something that sort of evolved to suit the desires of the people who are hearing about it. Maybe we like that idea. There's something very attractive to think that the manifestation will, talk to us and confirm our views. But of what enduring spiritual value can that be for a human being? To have somebody affirm what he already thinks, especially when it's wrong. I mean, the manifestation is the one person who has to set you aright because he has the vision. He has the understanding to do so. And this is one of the major themes of the Kitab-i-Iqan from beginning to end. You need to have a guide to figure out what's going on in the world, especially in the spiritual worlds. And your only infallible guide is the manifestation of God that was sent by God for that purpose. Right? So don't go listening to every Tom, Dick, and Harry because they don't know. They may sound nice, they may sound convincing, but go back to the source. Go back to the one who is totally trustworthy. And I'm not exaggerating when I say from beginning to end. You read the very opening of Kitab-i-Iqan, and that's what he says. And then you read the very last page of Kitab-i-Iqan, and that's what he says. The whole message of the book was to point initially this uncle of the Bab and then all the rest of humanity to understand the truth and to be able to distinguish it for themselves. Because once you get it, then you can look around you at the whole world and a lot of things become clear. So we have a principle in the faith that I want to bring up now that we've talked about the guardian. This is a letter written on his behalf to Mrs. Shahnaz Waite, who was an early Baha'i from San Francisco. It's dated the 23rd of February, 1933. Shoghi Effendi wishes to emphasize that what is truly authoritative are the words of the master. In all such cases, we should try and find out what he has said and abide by his words, even though they seem to conflict with the findings of modern scholars. If he does not say something on a subject, then the individual is free to accept or refute what scholars such as Abul-Fazl say. Through the discussion of these statements by scholars, the truth will ultimately be found, but at no time should their decision be considered as final. So I cited that because now we're going to look at Abdu'l-Baha. What did Abdu'l-Baha say about this idea that we see the guardian approving of? So I'm going to begin with a passage that was found. It was translated for the first time in a collection called Baha'i Scriptures, published in 1923. Many of you have copies of this. It's an old Baha'i book. It turns out that a lot of the translations in it were not very well done. So it hasn't been reprinted for a long time. But there are in there some good translations, and we can verify them because we know the original tablets in Persian. I'll get to that in a minute. There's a tablet which he called the Loy Isman Azam, which means the tablet of the great name, the greatest name. It's published in Persian in Mahdi Asmani, volume 2, page 102. It's available online. You go to, for those who read Persian, you can go to Baha'i Reference. You can look it up because all of the volumes of Mahdi Asmani are there. So it was first translated in Baha'i Scriptures as number 914 because all of the passages were numbered in that collection on page 479. And this was the English translation. Briefly, Such are the least of the mysteries of the composition of the greatest name upon the stone of the divine ring. The divine ring, ring stone. Observe also that the three planes represent the world of God, the world of command, and the world of creation, which are the sources of the signs. The world of God is the source of glorious bounty. The world of command is the pure and luminous mirror which depends upon the sun of truth. And the world of creation is the source of the acquisition of lights, which is due to the supreme conjunction to take from God and to give to the creatures. So that is that passage. Here is another one that comes from another of the tablets of Abdu'l-Baha, which is called the Sharh Wahda de Wujud, which means the commentary on the doctrine of the unity of all things, the unity of existence, which was a doctrine of the Sufis, very popular amongst especially the followers of Ibn al-Arabi, but most of the Persian Sufis also adopted this view. The mystics in general believe that existence is limited to two conditions. One is God, and the other is creation. They believe that God is the inner reality of things, and creation, the appearance of things. As for the people of truth is a term for the Baha'is. As for the people of truth, existence has three degrees: God and command, which is the primal will, and creation. The primal will, which is the world of command, is the inner reality of things, and all existing things are the manifestations of the divine will, not the manifestations of the divine reality and identity. Then it cites a quotation from the Quran. His is the command and the creation. So Abdu'l-Baha is pointing us back to the Quran as a source, a canonical, dependable, revealed source for this idea. As to the station of Godhead, it is independent and sanctified from the understanding and comprehension of created things, leave alone that it penetrates into the realities of things. So, another one more passage before I get to the ones that you know, because I'm going to cite two quotations that you're familiar with. You've seen them many times. Not so among the prophets who have proven the existence of three worlds: the world of God, the world of command, and the world of creation. The world of command and the station is the station of the primal will, which is the universal reality that is resolved into infinite forms. So now, what is the source of the two quotations that talks about the reality and how it is in three different kinds of existence? I want to see if I'd like to see a show of hands of those people who know what I'm referring to. Okay, so Phyllis, unmute yourself and tell us, where is it found?
No, I don't think I can. I mean, I don't think that
Okay.
I can.
Okay,
I may
all
be
right.
wrong that I can't, but right in this moment, I don't think I can.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to tell you, and then you're going to be, oh, really? Okay. All right. They're both found in some answered questions. And why is this important? It's important because some answered questions was compiled from the questions asked of Abdu'l-Baha by an American believer a long time ago, over 100 years ago. She sat down with Abdu'l-Baha over and over at his table and asked him questions, and he answered. And then later on, by the way, she understood Persian very well. So she wrote down his responses, and then she translated them, but she had the Persian record of what he had said, and he went in and he corrected it. So what was published in Persian was Abdu'l-Baha, 100%, no question. You know, we can ask questions about talks, for example. There are things that are, that we find in talks that when we compare the English transcript with the Persian transcript, there's stuff in the English that wasn't there in the Persian. That happens. There are those oddities, but that not so with some answered questions. It is as dependable as reading a tablet, right? So I'm going to read you passages from this particular collection of answered questions. And why is it important? Because she asked a question that all of us ask at one time or another. And that is, how does it all fit together? What and how am I supposed to respond to the huge diversity of points of view among human beings about what's real and what's not real? If there's one thing that we human beings have got down, it's diversity. Oh my, unity is much more problematic for us, but diversity, we've got it. Okay. So here's his first response. That is, it's published in chapter 53, which is the first appearance of this theme. The connection between God and his creation is that of originator and originated, of the sun and the dark bodies of the universe, of the craftsman and his handiwork. The procession of creation from God is a procession through emanation. That is, creation emanates from God. It does not manifest him. The first thing to emanate from God is that universal reality which the ancient philosophers termed the first intellect, and which the people of Baha called the primal will. Those are quotations from a much longer description in chapter 53. Then we go to chapter 62. Okay. Know, this is the very beginning of the chapter. Know that the degrees of existence are infinite, but the degrees of servitude, of prophethood, and of divinity. Isn't that interesting? Infinite, but they all belong to one of these three worlds: servitude, prophethood, divinity. And then he says, but the perfections of God and of creation are infinite. So this is from, and I'll go on a little bit more. For example, Peter cannot become Christ. At most, he can attain infinite perfections in the degrees of the station of servitude. For every existing reality is capable of progress. As the spirit of man lives forever, after casting off this elemental frame, it is, like all existing things, undoubtedly capable of progress. And thus, one may pray for a departed soul to advance, to be forgiven, and to be made the recipient of divine favors, bounties, and grace. That is why, in the prayers of Baha'u'llah, the forgiveness and pardon of God are implored for those who have ascended to the next world. Moreover, just as people are in need of God in this world, so too are they in need of him in the next. The creatures are ever in need, and God is ever completely independent of them, whether in this world or in the world to come. And now, from the most comprehensive and lengthy description that Abdu'l-Baha wrote, he has a chapter on pantheism. It's chapter 82 of Some Answered Questions. See, so we've had 53, 62, and now 82. So in 82, he says, and I'm just quoting the most pertinent verses that refer to this subject. The argument in there distinguishing the Sufi point of view from the view espoused by the prophets of God is phenomenal. And it is, again, like everything Abdu'l-Baha does, it is so clear, it is so manifest. You know, there are no ambiguities in it. In brief, the prophets and the philosophers are in agreement on one point, namely, that the cause through which all things are realized is but one. The difference is that the prophets teach that God's knowledge does not require the existence of created things, whereas the knowledge of the creatures requires the existence of objects of knowledge. If the divine knowledge stood in need of aught else, then it would be like the knowledge of the creatures and not that of God. For the pre-existent is incommensurate with the originated, and the originated is opposite to the pre-existent. The real existence through which all things are realized, that is, the reality of the divine essence through which all things have come to exist, is acknowledged by all. The difference resides in the fact that the Sufis maintain that the realities of all things are the manifestation of the one, whereas the prophets say that they emanate therefrom. And great indeed is the difference between manifestation and emanation. In summary, the Sufis speak only of God and creation and believe that God has resolved himself into and manifested himself through the infinite forms of his creation, even as the sea which appears in the infinite forms of his waves, of its waves. The prophets, however, hold that there are the world of God, the world of the kingdom, and the world of creation. Three things. The first emanation is the outpouring of the kingdom, which is emanated from God and has appeared in the realities of all things, even as the rays emanating from the sun are reflected in all things. So those are the three passages which for our, see, whereas Shoghi Effendi wrote about this topic very succinctly, and he was reiterating what Abdu'l-Baha said, but in the fewness of words. For the full description, the philosophical and theological description, we have to go to Abdu'l-Baha. And Abdu'l-Baha's writings and talks on the subject are accessible to us in English, and they are, I won't say they're easy. I think that that would be showing a disrespect for human understanding. They're challenging. They're particularly challenging because we are bombarded from birth with other people's ideas. And so our opportunity to have a direct one-on-one relationship with the truth revealed by the manifestation starts to be interrupted from the time we're born. You know, this is one of the reasons why Abdu'l-Baha says it's so important for Baha'i mothers to say prayers for their children in the womb. You got to prepare that kid, you know, because as soon as he comes out, he's going to get bombarded with what? Human diversity. Yay. We're all different, right? But how are you going to bring together all of these different people? They're going to have some basic acknowledgements of what is real and what is not real. And this is where this is pointing. So I've covered sorry, I've covered the sources that are easily accessible to you in English, as well as in Farsi. Now we're going to look at Baha'u'llah. And again, only from sources that are translated. Although I can read some Arabic and very little Persian, I'm not a scholar of those languages or of the terminology that they're using. I made that decision back in 1978, or maybe it was 79. I think it was more like 79. I went to the University of Chicago, fully intending to become a professor of Islamic studies and to devote myself to understanding the Baha'i writings and the Babi writings in the original languages. That was my intention. And I found it very difficult to understand Persian as it was taught to me by the British professor. He was doing it the old-fashioned way, where you give the student a whole long list of words and say, memorize them and be able to get them right when I see you next time. It didn't work for this old brain. I guess I was too old even at that age, at the age of 30, to be able to do that. So I went to Dr. Heshmat Mayad, who was the director of Islamic studies, or what they called Near Eastern languages and literatures. I went to him and I asked him, what shall I do? I can't learn Persian from this guy. He said, go to Iran. Now, friends, what happened in 1978? You know what happened. It was the build-up to the Islamic Revolution. In January of 1979, the monarchy came down and the revolution happened. So I was going to go to Iran, and my NSA told me not to. And I didn't understand why. They saved my life. Because can you imagine this outspoken American living in Tehran or in Shiraz at the time of the revolution?
Hey, Daddy.
Yes, baby.
Chris. No.
Yes, but you go back to take her to the gym, take her to the gym, take her to the gym. Take her to the gym. Yes. Here you go. Now, there are two ways to please a child. One way is give them candy. The other one is to give them their phone. So I opt for the giving the phone because candy is awful stuff. All right. And they love the phone, and they entertain themselves, and they probably learn a lot of good things as long as we watch them like hawks and make sure they don't watch the wrong things. Yeah. So I was just telling you this little anecdote that I thought I was going to become a professor of Islamic studies, and then life took me in a different direction, and I didn't go, and I don't have any regrets at all. But I could tell you from years and years, all those years, 40 years of close association with Baha'is who devoted themselves to studying Islam and studying those languages and perfecting their knowledge of those languages. I could tell you that everything I'm telling you here, they have discovered as well. Because it's there. There's no, this is the truth. The truth is the truth, you know? So let's go on with what Baha'u'llah says about the truth. And by the way, we never had such clear statements from Baha'u'llah until they published the collection of his Persian writings, which is called the Tabernacle of Unity. So the quotation I'm about to read you, this does not come from the writings that were translated by The Guardian, and it was not accessible to Marion Lippett. It was not accessible to Imogene Hoag. This has only become accessible to those of us who read English when this compilation was published. Here's what he says. Another question raised by the distinguished Sahib is the following. There are 4 schools of thought in the world. One school affirmeth that all the visible worlds from atoms to sun constitute God himself, and that naught can be seen but him. Another school claimeth that God is that essence which must of a necessity exist, that his messengers are the intermediaries between him and his creatures, and that their mission is to lead humanity unto him. Yet another school holdeth that the stars were created by the necessary being, God, whilst all other things are their effect and outcome. These things continually appear and disappear as the minute creatures that are generated in a pool of water. A further school maintaineth that the necessary being hath fashioned nature, through whose effect and agency all things, from atoms to suns, appear and disappear without beginning or end. What need then for an account and a reckoning? As the grass groweth with the coming of the rain and vanisheth thereafter, so it is with all things. So, if the prophets and the kings have instituted laws and ordinances, the proponents of this school argue, this hath been only for the sake of preserving civil order and regulating human society. The prophets and the kings, however, have acted in different ways. The former have said, God hath spoken thus, that the people might submit and obey, whilst the latter have resorted to the sword and the cannon. Which of these 4 schools is approved in the sight of God? Boy, he really laid it out, didn't he? Even when you look around us today, those are probably the 4 different points of view about how things have come into existence. So here's Baha'u'llah's response. Of the 4 schools mentioned above, it is clear and evident that the second standeth closer to righteousness. For the apostles and messengers of God have ever been the channels of his abounding grace, and whatsoever man hath received from God hath been through the intermediary of these embodiments of holiness and essences of detachment, these repositories of his knowledge and exponents of his cause. So what was the second? Just to remind ourselves. The second was the school that claimeth that God is the essence that must of necessity exist, that his messengers are the intermediaries between him and his creatures, and that their mission is to lead humanity unto him. What do you have here, my friends? The 3 conditions of existence. It's very clear. This is Baha'u'llah saying it. Not saying it, we don't have to use any sort of Kabbalistic interpretation of his, get words out of his numbers or numbers out of his words. We don't have to twist things. We don't have to do any sort of somersaults in order to understand what he's saying here. And there are many passages where he talks about this in, what shall I say? I will say somewhat less clear language, clear from our perspective. We like things to be spelled out, especially since those of us who read Ernest Hemingway when we were children, ever since we read Ernest Hemingway, we say, like, well, just say what you want to say, will you? Just say it. Don't embroider it. Don't confuse me. Well, we got that straight statement from the Guardian. We got it from Abdu'l-Baha, and here we have it from Baha'u'llah. So this is I want to quote a couple of other passages And the reason why I want to do it is because it brings up an important issue. Baha'u'llah sometimes talks about there being infinite worlds. If we don't refer that statement to this passage that I just cited from his tablet to Manakshi Sahib in Persian, if we don't refer it to the answers in some answered questions, if we don't refer it to the tablets of Abdu'l-Baha, if we don't refer it to the guardian statements on the subject, we can become confused. We can say, well, Baha'u'llah says this over here and he says that over here, and what's true? I don't know. I'm confused. How do I relate these things to each other? Very important thing for us to understand that Baha'u'llah is talking about worlds within worlds. Within the condition of creation, the world of creation, there are infinite worlds. Because, for example, in the Seven Valleys, he talks about the condition in which you find yourself when you're sleeping, when you see something that is going to happen in the future when you're sleeping. He talks about it in the Seven Valleys. He says that your experience of another dimension of existence in your sleep is a proof of the fact that there are infinite worlds of God. Because that experience is not identical for every person. We're going somewhere else from this other person. And for us to understand, within the condition of creation, there are infinite worlds. Within the condition of prophethood, of the primal will, of the word, of the manifestation of God, there are infinite worlds. And within the world of God, there are infinite worlds. We don't understand anything about the world of God. We don't understand and of what possible use would it be for us to understand the Creator beyond what he has revealed about himself to us. Yes, that's valuable because he gave it to us for our education, for our benefit. But there's a marvelous passage in the Gleanings, page 175, where he says, once you have discovered that you cannot even understand your soul, then you will understand that it's impossible for you to understand God. We're helpless. Human beings have limitations, very severe limitations. And yet within our world of existence, we have infinite capacities. And this understanding of the multitude of worlds that we do live in and that we can understand is going to come across here. As to thy question concerning the worlds of God, know thou of a truth that the worlds of God are countless in their number and infinite in their range. None can reckon or comprehend them except God, the all-knowing, the all-wise. Verily, I say, the creation of God embraceth worlds besides this world, and creatures apart from these creatures. In each of these worlds he hath ordained things which none can search except himself, the all-searching, the all-wise. Do thou meditate on that which we have revealed unto thee, that thou mayest discover the purpose of thy Lord, and the Lord of all worlds. In these words, the mysteries of divine wisdom have been treasured. That beautiful passage is found in Gleanings and also in the Shoghi Effendi in the tablets of Baha'u'llah. And here is another one. And this one is only translated, is found in the Advent of Divine Justice. By the way, next time you read that book, make sure that you spend lots of time reading the quotations of Baha'u'llah that are translated for the first and in some cases the only time into English, which are towards the very end of the book. Clearly, the guardian intended to inspire and educate us by including such an extraordinary collection of statements from Baha'u'llah. This is one of them. Through his potency, the trees of divine revelation have yielded their fruits, every one of which hath been sent down in the form of a prophet, bearing a message to God's creatures in each of the worlds, whose number God alone, in his all-encompassing knowledge, can reckon. Every single letter proceeding from our mouth is endowed with such regenerative power as to enable it to bring into existence a new creation, a creation the magnitude of which is inscrutable to all save God. He verily hath knowledge of all things. It is in our power, should we wish it, to enable a speck of floating dust to generate in less than the twinkling of an eye suns of infinite, of unimaginable splendor, to cause a dewdrop to develop into vast and numberless notions, to infuse into every letter such a force as to empower it to unfold all the knowledge of past and future ages. Yes, it's very hard to have normal human conversation after you've read that passage. I mean, I read that and I know that the carefully trained critical faculty of in my physical possession wants to find an explanation for that is compatible with the understandings of my fellow human beings and compatible with my own wishes and desires. But I can't do it. I just can't. I mean, honestly, I read those words and I think, Baha'u'llah is not going to say this to impress us. He's not going to say this to show off his elocution or to embellish upon his claims. He's telling us the truth. He's telling us the truth. And if the manifestation of God has this power, imagine what God has. Imagine how completely beyond our understanding God is if he who has this power says, I don't know anything about God except what God reveals to me. The manifestation doesn't know. And so one of the things that has been pointed out by people who have carefully studied the writings of the Bab is the Bab is very meticulous in stating the immense gulf between God and any other being. And the fact that whatever knowledge we come to have of God is through an intermediary and is not is for our consumption. It is for our understanding. And I believe that this is one of the reasons why the Guardian did not write interpretations of the hidden words. The hidden words speak to us, and they speak directly to us. And they speak directly in ways that are so astonishing over the years, because the same hidden word comes to mean different things at different times. That's because our receptivity changes. And it's not a straight line either. It's not even a spiral. Sometimes our understanding of reality is really pretty off the wall. It's really, we go through these dark nights of soul where we don't get it, where we're really cut off. And then we have other times when just everything we see and everyone we meet and every word we read feels like God is talking to us. It's really And so I'm going to, I said I was going to limit myself. And I want to give you opportunity, but I become overly verbose and taken half an hour of your time. Okay? So now I'm going to figure out a way to unmute, but so that I don't create a, you know, that very odd thing when you're waiting for somebody else to speak and then you speak and then the other person speaks at the same. Let's avoid that. So what I'm going to try to do here is unmute individuals who raise hands. Okay? And we'll just ask that you may have 50 questions or 50 statements you want to make, but remember that there are lots of other people here as well. So leave them time as well. Okay? So, all right. So let's see who wants to go first. Yes, I want to tell you something. I had the great privilege of studying a provisional translation of the Persian Bayan over the course of, I don't know, many months. I think it was like 10 months, with a group of people. And when we would come to this time for people to come and express themselves, we had been saturated with reading, even in English translation, reading the Word of God. We didn't have any, and none of us had anything to say. We're just overwhelmed emotionally and intellectually by the influence of having encountered this word. So, but I know that once somebody gets the ball rolling, then other people will want to participate. So somebody kick it off. Okay, let's see now. There you go. Now you can unmute.
Peter, I just want to make sure it's me you were
It's
intending
you.
to unmute, because I couldn't see
Yeah.
if other people were raising their hands.
No, I couldn't see any. No, Tim is going to raise his hand too, so we'll let
Good.
him in
I didn't
afterwards.
cut anybody off.
Yeah.
The first part of a two-part question is very simple, and you may not have it at hand right now, but I'm interested in the page number of whatever version you were using from Advent of Divine Justice for that stupendous passage.
Oh, normally I have the page number right in
Don't
my.
worry, that can be later. I can email you. That there's no
But
urgency.
yeah,
The second
send me an email. Yeah.
the second question that comes to me is, it's really tough because I feel like I'm editing myself. How would you share that passage from Advent with someone encountering the faith early or for the first time, let's say? I mean, that could be anywhere from first day to maybe, let's say, 3 months in of investigating the faith. And of course, one answer is I wouldn't, we're discerning, we choose. But that passage is really remarkable. And I just wonder about sharing it with souls who either don't know about the faith yet or have a very early acquaintance with it. If you have any thoughts about that. Should I mute myself?
No, you don't have to mute yourself because you might want to have an exchange with me. So,
okay.
So it's clear to me that Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, and Shoghi Effendi wanted us to so train ourselves spiritually that we would have an intuitive sense of what the seeker in front of us was ready to hear.
Yeah.
And if you've had experiences where you've been teaching the faith and you feel this inward break go on, like, oh, no, don't talk about that. Follow it. Follow it, because that's your soul telling you it's not the right time, So, but there are no hard rules, because You might encounter a soul who is so receptive to Baha'u'llah that you can tell them this, and this will make it for them. This will say, anybody who would say such a thing deserves not only my attention, but my, the full force of my inquiry to find out if this is a true word from God. Because what else could that be but a word from God? I mean, a word from a human being would say, watch me, watch what I can do. Here, see that plant over there? I'm going to turn that into a turnip. I'm going to turn it into a human being. Ha! Well, obviously, human beings can't do that. Right? And so that if anybody makes a claim like that, that they're not true unless it's coming from God. So I mean, that's my response is you have to feel what is appropriate for the seeker. But the other thing is we shouldn't have any kind of dogmatic ideas about who's not ready for what. It's individual. It's totally individual. And you have to feel it with your heart, with your intuition.
This is really helpful. That was really helpful. I mean, that's the truth. And you've stated it nice and clearly. That's the guideline. It's all about hearts. That was really helpful.
It really is when you're, I have to tell you, it also has to be sort of self-conscious. I mean, unself-conscious. It can't be deliberate. You didn't write it down on a piece of paper. Shut up about this. Okay. No, like don't talk about chastity with this person. No. How do you know? How do you know? Seriously, you have no idea. You have to go with what it feels right at the time you're teaching, because if you're teaching in the right way, the concourse on high is helping you.
Right.
Why? Because he says it is.
Yeah.
He's not going to make up something like that. He says, if you teach my faith, you will be guided.
Yeah.
All right. Now, Tim, you want to go next?
No, I don't really have anything. I'm just listening. Thank you.
Oh, so you were just sweeping away the flies. Okay. All right. So who would like to jump in? I know that Mr. Urlacher was like to join us and say something because he's been part of Violetta Zane's class and asking a million questions.
Well, you may not like it though.
I like all questions.
When you first brought up turning to the center of the covenant, whatever time that you're existing, you were saying that you didn't mention the universal house of justice to my recollection. And immediately the first thing that sprang in my mind is, what do space colonies, moon colonies, Mars colonies, just traveling in space, how do the laws of Baha'u'llah even apply? How do you know what's a day? How do you know how to turn to east? I mean, when do you know when to fast? All of those things go away.
Okay, so I think that there is an actual a quite clear answer to that, and that is that we know because the Universal House of Justice was created by Baha'u'llah for that purpose. The purpose is that we must have a source of authority and especially a source of governing principles, what we would call law. Law is not necessarily always going to be in the form of the law that we see passed by our Congress, for example. It doesn't have to be written on 500 pages of paper and legal size paper and approved by lawyers. But law is a decision, a concerted decision that is made in the case of the Universal House of Justice in the absence of there not being a clear statement in the writings. And in the writings, obviously, there are no clear statements on how we would apply Baha'i laws in another planet. And so, but would we have to apply those Baha'i laws on another planet? Of course, because it's part of the universe. And we're living in that. If we're living on that planet, as Baha'is, we have the same obligations. So they would have to legislate on that. And I have no doubt that they would legislate on that. I mean, we could have human beings living beyond this particular solar system, living in other solar systems. And if they're followers of Baha'u'llah, they're going to want to follow his laws. They pray at the right times, commemorate at the right times, read the writings, and so forth. So I don't think that that's a problem at all. And the point is here, we've been talking about in this session about things that are clearly expounded in the writings, that are, and not just by Baha'u'llah, but also by Abdu'l-Baha and by Shoghi Effendi. So we have clear interpretations, and there are so many things like that that exist in the Baha'i revelation. That's one of the reasons why compilations have become so valuable to us, but also why search engines, because we can take a topic and we can research that topic using a search engine and find out what Baha'u'llah said about it, what Abdu'l-Baha said, and what Shoghi Effendi said. And there, through using the covenant of Baha'u'llah, we are coming to a clear understanding of particular principles and teachings of the faith. And another thing that's very interesting, those of you who have studied the Kitab-i-Yagan know that there's a wonderful passage where Baha'u'llah talks about the city of God. And the city of God in every dispensation is the book of God revealed for that dispensation. And he says that in the dispensation of him whom God shall make manifest, that his book will be the book whereby we will understand all of the previous revealed scriptures. This principle is completely in line with and supports what Abdu'l-Baha said in chapter 62. He says the prophets of God say there are three worlds, three things, not one thing, not two things, three different kinds of existence. The prophets of God. And so you have, and then you have in that tablet to Meenakshi Sahib from Baha'u'llah, him saying the same thing. So this is important because when Baha'u'llah makes a statement, the statement is clarifying what all the previous manifestations have taught. And that is how we come to unity of religion. We don't come to unity of religion by somehow thinking we're going to take a little bit of this one and a little bit of that way and put together in a great big, pot and mix it together, and then we'll come up with our new faith. That may be something that human beings would like to do, and there are certainly lots of people who study comparative religion who would like to do that sort of thing. But it's not Baha'u'llah's solution. The Baha'u'llah's solution is contained in two words: progressive revelation. So, Mary, you want to say something? Let me undo you.
No, I can unmute. Thank you.
Oh, you can unmute. Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. I mean,
Sure.
just two things. If you want to find any Baha'i quote just about, you can Google it, believe it or not. It'll bring it right up. And it's very useful to do that. Sometimes you might have to add a word or two, but you can do that. Secondly, if you want to see the book, Some Answered Questions, there was a new one brought out in 2015, and they are not exactly the same. So it's be wise to get the update if you can. That's all.
Yes. Very good point on both of those. And by the way, you can also, if you're either of Persian background or you have the determination to learn one or both of these languages of revelation, is you can gain access to the originals of all these quotes. The original terminology that Baha'u'llah is using and Abdu'l-Baha is using. I'll tell you this. I used to think when I first studied Arabic, it was at university, and then I continued when I was in my graduate studies. And somebody told me it's going to take you 10 years to be able to read Arabic. It's not true. It's not true. They're trying to discourage you. There are only so many jobs for professors of Islamic studies. Okay. So if we can discourage you by saying that, then we got rid of somebody. Okay. Because it's really not to the advantage of the institutions to graduate a whole bunch of people with the qualifications to be professors, and there are no jobs for them. You see, it's not like doctors in America where, we could have, we could have 10 times as many doctors and it would be great because there's a need for them.
Oh,
Yes, baby.
thank you.
Okay.
Oh,
All right.
thank you.
Okay. Yes, darling.
I just
So-
have one quick thing.
Yes.
We're very fortunate that in our study group, we go from one thing to another. We have a wonderful person who speaks both Arabic and Farsi. So that if we have a question about something, the translation of something, she can give us the original and give some color to it. I mean, we're not listening to her translate, but she can give some background on it. So it's really nice to have a variety of people in your study groups.
I also highly recommend that you that anybody go and find a website associated with the University of California at Merced. Merced is MERCED. And that website is called Hurkalya. Hurkalya, which is HURQALYA. And it is the website of Dr. Stephen Lambdon. Stephen Lambdon is a very dear friend of mine, devoted Baha'i, and one of the most prolific and profound scholars of the faith. And he is very, very, very humble. So he would never say such things about himself. Okay. All right. And he does not promote himself in any way. But if you go to his website, you will find translations where he actually explains the meaning, the multiple meanings of words, and shows why a particular word, a particular translation is appropriate. This is very helpful to us for any of us who are reading, because the reality is that when you're reading the Guardian's writings, you better have a dictionary, right? If you're reading prayers by, prayers of Baha'u'llah, especially the ones by Baha'u'llah, you better have a dictionary, because he's going to throw out a word and you're going to, I don't know what that word means. Well, if you're going to pray that prayer, you need to know what the word means. It's important. And the same thing is when you're studying the writings in Arabic and Persian, which, by the way, you can learn the alphabet in a weekend. You can. It's not a big deal. It's really not a big deal. You can learn about how basically Persian doesn't have any grammar. It's everything is a special case. So you can learn that and then not be looking for a pattern that's always going to be true. And in Arabic, you can learn that there is a pattern and it's absolutely rock solid. Okay. And so depending on your tendency as a person, you will be attracted to Persian or you'll be attracted to Arabic. Probably not to both of them, but learning them is not as hard as we've been taught. And there's a wonderful project called the Utterance Project that Adib Masumian has published online. And this enables you to hear the text in Arabic or Persian recited while looking at the actual text. and it's typed out. It's not written in a hand script. It's not written a calligraphic script, which is very hard to decipher. If it's typed out, the letters are very clear. Like I said, they're like 28 letters in Arabic. That's it. You learn the letters, you know how to read the language. So I recommend that because the satisfaction, the joy of learning even one prayer of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha, or the Bab in the original language, of being able to pronounce it yourself, and of being able to see the letters and understand that the letters are representing the words that you're saying. I don't know why, it's a deeply rewarding spiritual experience, but you can't do it through someone else, Sure, it's great to ask your community member who's fluent in the language, but it's not the same as experiencing it for yourself. Chris, you want to say something?
Yes.
Where's Chris? There's
Right.
Chris. Hi.
Thank you. I really appreciate listening to someone on this topic. We've been having a devotional study using the long healing prayer and the fire tablet. And of course, the fire tablet mentions the worlds of God on each of the 50 triads that are in that tablet. And it's very powerful. And so we're now at the point where we've pondered every verse, and now we're ready to talk about the worlds. And now I'm not sure how I'm going to take all that you've talked about and kind of bring it into what we're going to go over, but it's this has been very helpful. And I love the question by Joe on other worlds. And of course, then the curiosity comes if, Abdu'l-Baha talked about, and I don't have the quote handy, but other worlds with creatures that are created by the components of the world they're living on. So you might have creatures that don't use sound the way we do, or letters the way we do, and that's a whole nother thing. But fortunately, we'll leave that to the all-powerful, the all-knowing. I'm sure he has a way to figure that out.
Well, we wouldn't be able to exist in those worlds if you think about it. How could creatures live on any planet, let alone a different world, unless their elements of their being were actually composed of something that is organic? It's not possible. And that's why we must never forget that in this world, we are animals, right? We're composed of an animal nature, and that animal nature has all of the characteristics of other created natures on the planet, And even when the messenger of God comes to us, he's in a human body, because how else would he come here? How else could we communicate with him if he didn't assume a form that could exist in this world? So
Yeah.
that's how it is. And I think that, remember that Baha'u'llah is, when he's calling us to have an awareness of humanity as a whole, that's the first step. That's not the end game. No, there is no end game to this. He's introducing us to the concept that life is infinite in its forms. And the first thing that we need to understand is to live that principle in this world, and to treat our fellow human beings as if they were actually human beings, rather than spawn of Satan, right? Or whatever, we have various ways of characterizing people who are different from us. But, in the Epistles of the Son of the Wolf, Baha'u'llah talks about the station of recognizing humanity as a whole and having fellowship with humanity and loving your fellow human beings. And he says this is the highest station. of course. For now it is. And this is the station we must all attain to before we can go to the next one.
So I do have a question, but I have to respond to that. It brings me to one of the phrases in the long obligatory prayer, which says, and make mention in this world as well as the others. So we have a lot to do and a long time to exist, if you think about that. But my question is back at the very beginning when you were talking about Shoghi Effendi and the dispensation and the being very clear that God does not incarnate on this planet in a human being's body, and how one can deal with that when Baha'u'llah does say in some cases he is God, and otherwise he's just I forget what the quote is, but in essence, a very humble statement.
Oh, he does. There's a wonderful statement in the, yes, go ahead.
But let me just get the question out, which is, I have a very dear person who is a longtime Baha'i from several generations, studies the dispensation, etc., and constantly repeats in study sessions that Baha'u'llah is God. And of course, by that statement in Gleanings, he is God. But she, goes on to say, because it's the most we can know, which is true. And yet my concern is for people who are not Baha'i yet and are listening, how confusing this might be. So how do you respond to that, or do we?
There's a wonderful, I say you want an answer, get it from God. So you do. It's in the Kitab-i-Agan. In the Kitab-i-Agan, he says, if the manifestation of God says he's a human being, if you would consider him to be a human being, he says that's true. And he quotes the Quran, various passages indicating that he has a human nature, just like you and me. Exactly. Okay. Human being. Then he says, and if you were to claim that he is the messenger of God, that's true too. And he quotes the Quran. Okay. And he explains why. Why can you say that he's a human being? Because he has all the attributes of a human being. He sleeps, he eats, he does everything a human being does, right? And why is he a messenger of God? Because he does everything a messenger of God does. And there are a whole long list of things that messengers of God do that human beings don't do. Like predict something that's going to happen in the future and it actually happens, rather than our meteorologists who tell us it's going to rain tomorrow and then we have sunshine. Well, and human beings love predicting, but we're pretty bad at it, and so then he says that if you're a manifestation of God, then you have these qualities, and that's true too. And then he says this one, he says, and if you claim that he is God, that is true, because the manifestation has all the characteristics, the attributes of God. He is reflecting all of those characteristics. And again, don't listen to my words here. Go find this in the Kitab-i-Agan, and you will see for yourself. Quote the words directly to the seeker, and the seeker will go, yeah, that makes sense. Because the words that Baha'u'llah uses explain the reality of the situation, which is the manifestation has multiple roles to play. And when he gives a command in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, he is God, okay? You're not getting it from anybody higher than him. This is coming straight from God. And he actually talks about this. He says in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, he says, when you have a dispute, a difference of opinion, come to God to resolve it. Yes, because there is no other God save Baha'u'llah when he is before you and you are asking for his advice. You can't go and say, oh, well, I think I'll talk to some other God. You know, it's like, I don't like what you're saying, so I'll go to him. No, this is the buck stops with him. So in that sense, he's representing God himself in this world. But the other thing is that we're being pushed by Baha'u'llah to think in a different way. We're used to thinking in a very literal fashion. And when I say literal, we could be literal in our mystical way of thinking, or we could be literal in our materialistic way of thinking, because someone who is mystical can say that they interpret everything in terms of their philosophy of pantheism, and so therefore it must be true. So they're holding on to their perception just as much as the literal interpreter is. So let's not bash fundamentalist Christians here, okay? Because they're just trying to figure out stuff, you know, and you can have many different perspectives that are wrong, but there is a truth, and that truth is one, and that truth unites all people once they recognize that one truth. That's the whole point here of, when Baha'u'llah talks about the solution to the world, the ailments and the remedy for all ailments in the world is the recognition of one cause. He's talking about the oneness that comes when you recognize the authority of the manifestation of God. And he's going to tell you what's real. No? And when you rely on him, you find that there's so many things that are clear, understandable, that were nothing but like mosquitoes previously, because they just perplexed you all the time. Well, how come this and how come that and how come the other thing? But they're all solved. They're all resolved. And it's not because he even told you exactly word for word how to look at it. It's once you have this perspective, and the perspective is in line with reality, then all of the other things fall into place. This was actually a very a major truth for the covenant too. When you understand the covenant, then it's obvious, and then it's obvious that you wouldn't want to go and break that covenant. It's when people don't understand the covenant that they break the covenant unwittingly, even unknowing that they're doing it. Friends, it's 3 minutes over. Do you have more things that you want to bring up? Or oh, Mr. Kafis. Okay.
Okay, so we touched on how reading the writings of Baha'u'llah's revelation, we can understand the writings of previous religious scriptures more clearly. And on the topic of the three conditions of existence, I would like to briefly touch on a passage from the Old Testament and a passage from the New Testament of the Bible. It's specifically in the first chapter of the book of Genesis about the story of creation. Each of the verses starts with the phrase and God said. So God was speaking, or is speaking, creation into existence. And what's interesting is in the Hebrew, the word for God is the word Elohim. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right or not, but it's a plural word. But said, the verb, is singular. So that like implies one united will. It's not like, but, it's by using the word said, I mean, if you maybe paraphrase that word, it's like God is commanding. And so that's, you go back to the three conditions of existence. You have God, the unknowable essence, then you have the world of command. So those two worlds are collaborating to bring creation into existence. And jumping over into the New Testament in the book of John, the first chapter, it's John said, in the beginning was the Word. And so those first two conditions sound like they're both pre-created. They're both, before, so and in John 1, chapter 1, verse 14, it says that the Word was made flesh. So God, the unknowable essence, wasn't made flesh. And it came from the second, what was made flesh came from the second condition of existence, not the first condition of existence. So that's so it's you're the first or second verse in the first chapter of John where John says the Word was God, and that can be confusing because it doesn't mean that they're necessarily the same thing. And then you can, if you understand the analogy in the Baha'i writings about the mirror, how the mirror is, how the manifestations of God are the stainless mirrors, through which the light shines. Then you look in the mirror and you see God, so to speak, because that's what, but really it's the manifestation God. So that's kind of a way that, when you're reading the Bible and you're a little bit confused, well, what does it mean that the Word was God? And then Gary Matthews talks about it in one of his books, or more than one of his books, about the analogy of the mirror. And I think in the writings of Paul in the New Testament, Paul refers to a looking glass or something, to help describe things. So Gary Matthews brings that up in his writings. So I just thought, since we're on the topic of the three conditions, that I offer that up for everyone to think about.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. We're going to conclude in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to relate a short anecdote, which is going to tie into this theme, and then for the next two. Marin was the head of probably you'd call the instigator of the National Reference Library Committee, and then the head of that committee for many, many years. And one of the projects very early that she took on was to create an index for all the references to and interpretations of biblical verses by Abdu'l-Baha. And that enormous project took a whole team of people about a year, and it was published in the year of my birth, 1953. And many decades later, I hand typed the whole index into some sort of a software. I don't even remember what it is. And then Michael put it into another software, and I don't know, it's probably been in 2 or 3 others since then. But anyway, that software was the first place that the process of putting in those cards was the first time that I encountered many references to interpretation of the same passages from the Bible. And this particular passage of the beginning of the Gospel of John seems to have been very interesting to the Baha'is at the time. And so Abdu'l-Baha talked about it a lot. And he also talked about it in some answered questions. And all of those explanations point to exactly what Michael's talking about. This is talking about the second condition of existence. It's talking about the world of command, which, as we've seen, the guardian is talking. He says that this is also called the primal will. This is also called the word of God. This has got various different names. And he talks about this in some answered questions. The point being that when you can look at a previous scripture and understand the intention of the scripture, then you have a way of not only bringing something new to the Christian seeker that you encounter. It's not just bringing something new to them, it's actually creating a bridge for them to recognize Baha'u'llah as the return of Jesus, which is, after all, that's what all Christians are looking for. They're all looking for Baha'u'llah. They just don't know that Baha'u'llah is the one, he's the one with the new name. So we're going to get to that, because this is something that Marion and her team of people spent a whole lot of time doing, creating this Bible index. And then she created this other index. And so most of our time, we're going to be talking about the other index, what she called the master index. But let's not start that topic when we've run out of time. Let's start tomorrow. We'll be commencing at 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern, and hope to see you all there. Bye-bye.